The subject I chose for this final major project is based on dyslexia. At the beginning of the research stage, I came up with a plan. My proposal plan was an effective guideline giving me the right starting points on the subject matter to research for this project. I had to adapt to the project proposal due to the time constraints as a result of research and development. So I had to adapt my plan to include the simple animation techniques, 2D materials that I plan on using in the development stage when I design my ideas. My secondary research that I conducted leads to how dyslexia can impact education. I had to consider the challenges I faced growing up with the learning disability and the disability in general, which also informed my research. To gather information on the subject matter through the case studies based on the subject, how the pros and cons of the disability and what challenges that disability brings. The references I also looked at based on the artist research for the visualizing ideas from scribbles to storyboards that I looked at, which talks about the use of storyboard techniques that I'm planning on using in my work. To get an idea of how I want to construct my storyboard to tell my story. The other references that I gathered during this research stage are based on the Marion Max animation that shows how the characters interact and how it shows the aspects of dyslexia during their interaction and how they view the world in their opinion. Rhubarb and custard animation is different on the other hand. Even though the subject matter of the story does not match the dyslexia, I did look at the different animation techniques through the stop motion and animatic. Looking at Rhubarb and Custard was the way to dive into how the characters interact with each other with their facial features and their body language. My primary research came after when I took notes of my ideas and sketching them out into mind maps and understand the approach I wanted to take. At first I did struggle with this because not only did I didn't know which approach to take, but how I was going to lay out my animation and my storyboard. Experimenting, when I finally figured it out, I carried on experimenting with my ideas using mixed media, which was informed by the story I wrote when it comes to living with dyslexia, and then I narrowed it down to a script that I would use to develop this project further by constructing an animation storyboard. After the research stage, which led into the development of my ideas and the character design, using a range of mixed media as a way of exploring the subject matter, using different materials such as drawing tools, inks, paper, water pens, and digital media. The character from my sketches was, as the project went along, using traditional and modern processes in mixed media. The rough storyboards I sketched out from my ideas, I used them as a guideline. However, one of the challenges I faced was editing my storyboard many times by cutting and placing the storyboard in a right order to visually communicate my story. Using the script based on the feedback I received, I was able to make improvements on that aspect, making it easier for me to develop my project further. This helped me with regards to understanding how a storyboard works, how to structure a storyboard to effectively communicate a story. I wanted to communicate on the subject matter by telling my version of the story, in my opinion, about living with dyslexia. I wanted it to help people understand the learning disability, to inspire confidence, self-confidence, mental well-being in others, and detect the signs of dyslexia to improve education for those who struggle with the disability. The experimentation of the different animation techniques used at the end of the development phase. I wanted to use a phone and camera to experiment. I wanted to use a phone to experiment with the different angles and filters. The techniques used at the end of the experimentation phase was stop motion, GIF, cinematic photography for filming some of my scenes, and simple animation. I found this an interesting approach to take due to my interest in animation and how I wanted to approach with this technique and this approach in media to inform my story and the subject that I chose. I'm hoping that for my final animation I would incorporate at least one or two, maybe even three of these techniques into the design process of my final outcome. Spending 5 years in secondary school, I have always found education hard. The subjects I studied I did not understand. I find studying difficult when it comes to processing, retaining and understanding information. I felt unfocused, stressed and disorganized. This affected my mental health and my confidence. The extra support I received for math and English was ineffective because they did not know about my dyslexia. Struggling with exams, I found literacy an uphill battle. The only subject I passed during GCSEs was art. This made me frustrated and upset. Art and music have always helped me deal with the emotions I felt. After I finished with school and college, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 19 years old. Finding out that I am a visual learner with dyslexia means my brain is wired differently. This explains why art comes so easily to me. Finishing off the development stage and coming into the final stage, I refined my final form of my work in an animation format, giving the effect and approach to communicate a visual way to bring my story to life. I modified my work to communicate my intentions more effectively using the different animation techniques that I used as informed by my experimentation and my research, and to show the different stages of the development of my final outcome. My main techniques I chose to use for the final animation to communicate my story were stop motion, cinematic photography to film the different angles of some of my scenes, and the simple animation using the effects, using After Effects, Animate, and Premiere Pro. As intended, I am pleased with the finished result of my final outcome and hope to develop the project further in the future. I've achieved the structure of the story and how I communicated it using animation. I organized my time well to ensure the completion of my project. However, due to the time it took and the time restraints it took to research and develop my ideas, I couldn't factor in the time to experiment with 2D materials and incorporate the techniques in my animation. This led to me sticking with simple animation techniques in 2D style. My work has helped me identify and refine my individual creative practice based on the traditional processes I like to use, which informs and communicates my unique style using the drawing techniques, inks, and paints. I hope that I get to learn more and develop my skills as an animator in the future. The work I do helps me understand the existing traditional processes in that creative industry and illustration techniques I use within the practice. The artists I look at help inspire my creativity, and the discipline is evolving through the use of digital media as well as traditional processes. Being an illustrator is to be creative in your own way, to express your own style and have a voice. This also informs on the purpose of illustration, to express that creativity.